The Devourer fleet arrived at Altair exactly when the Federation's calculations predicted they would. Lisa watched them through the command ship's main viewer and felt her breath catch in her throat. The enemy vessels were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Dark metal constructs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, moving with mechanical precision that spoke of perfect coordination. There were 47 Devourer ships against the Federation's 31-vessel defense fleet. By conventional analysis, the Federation force had no chance of victory. But Lisa was not planning to fight conventionally. "All ships, this is Coordination Command," Lisa said into her communication headset. "Remember, we are not trying to fight a logical battle. We are trying to fight a battle that cannot be understood by pure logic. Trust your training and trust each other." The response came back from 31 different ship commanders representing a dozen species. Some voices carried confidence, others uncertainty, but all of them confirmed they were ready to follow her lead. Jake sat at a station next to her, monitoring communication patterns between the mixed crews. "Stress levels are high but manageable," he reported. "The crews are nervous, but they're functioning as units." Lisa nodded and activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "Commence Operation Wanderer." What happened next would have seemed like madness to any traditional military observer. Instead of forming battle lines or implementing standard tactical formations, the Federation fleet scattered in seemingly random directions. Ships moved in patterns that appeared to have no coordination, no purpose, no strategic value. The Voltari squadron, against every instinct bred into their species, attacked from 17 different angles with no apparent connection between their targets. The Cronin ships charged directly at the enemy in what looked like individual glory-seeking rather than coordinated assault. The Threnari vessels moved in formation for exactly 37 seconds before breaking apart and attacking in ways that violated every principle of their flight doctrine. The Devourers responded exactly as Lisa had hoped they would. Their machine intelligence immediately began analyzing the Federation attack patterns, looking for the underlying logic that would allow them to predict and counter future moves. But there was no underlying logic to find. For the first time in the war, the Devourers hesitated. "Devourer fleet is reducing forward momentum," reported the sensor officer, a young Threnari whose voice sang with excitement. "They appear to be confused." Lisa allowed herself a moment of hope. The plan was working, but she knew this was only the beginning. "All ships, implement Chaos Protocol 7, she ordered. What followed was even more impossible. Federation. Ships began changing their tactics in the middle of combat, switching from one approach to another with no warning or apparent reason. A Voltari captain would begin a logical flanking maneuver, then suddenly abandon it to join a Cronin frontal assault. Threnari formations would coordinate perfectly for minutes, then dissolve into individual ship actions that seemed completely unconnected. To the Devourers, it was like trying to solve a mathematical equation where the numbers kept changing. Every time their adaptive algorithms began to recognize a pattern, the pattern shifted to something completely different. But Lisa knew they could not rely on confusion alone. The Devourers were learning, just more slowly than usual. She could see them beginning to adapt to the concept of chaos itself, trying to predict unpredictability. "Jake," she said, "initiate Phase 2. Jake activated a new communication protocol they had developed during training. Instead of giving specific tactical orders, Lisa began coordinating her fleet through something that had never been tried in galactic warfare: emotion and intuition. "Voltari Squadron, I need you to feel what the enemy is going to do next," she said, don't calculate it, don't analyze it, just trust your instinct. Cronin ships, fight like your ancestors did before space travel. Let your warrior spirit guide you, not battle doctrine. Threnari wings, move like you're dancing instead of fighting. Let the rhythm of the battle tell you where to go. The results were extraordinary. Freed from the constraints of logical thinking, each species began fighting in ways that drew on deeper instincts than pure strategy. The Voltari, despite their reputation for cold logic, had evolved from creatures who hunted by anticipating prey behavior. The Cronin carried genetic memories of warriors who could sense danger before it manifested. The Threnari descended from beings who navigated by reading air currents and atmospheric changes. These ancient instincts, combined with advanced technology and the coordination Lisa provided, created something the galaxy had never seen before, a fighting force that adapted faster than its enemies could learn. The battle turned. Devourer ships that had seemed invincible began taking damage as Federation forces anticipated their moves through intuition rather than calculation. The machine intelligence that had conquered every logical opponent found itself facing an enemy that operated beyond the boundaries of logic. But just as Lisa began to believe they might actually win, the Devourers did something unexpected. Instead of continuing to adapt to Federation tactics, they began adapting to the concept of adaptation itself. "They're learning to be unpredictable," Jake said, his voice tight with worry. "The Devourer fleet is starting to implement random movement patterns." Lisa watched the enemy ships begin moving in seemingly chaotic formations, mimicking the unpredictability that had been the Federation's advantage. For a moment, she felt despair. If the Devourers could become just as unpredictable as her forces, the battle would come down to numbers and firepower, advantages the enemy clearly possessed. But then she realized something that made her smile, despite the desperate situation. "All ships," she said, "implement final protocol. Show them the difference between chaos and creativity." The Federation fleet suddenly stopped all chaotic movement and began working together with perfect coordination. But this was not the rigid coordination of traditional military doctrine. This was something new. A fluid, dynamic coordination that combined the logical precision of the Voltari, the individual brilliance of the Cronin, the group harmony of the Threnari, and the unpredictable creativity of humans. Ships moved in formations that shifted and flowed like living things. Attacks came from directions that were both completely unexpected and perfectly timed. The entire fleet began fighting as a single organism that could think and adapt in real time. The Devourers, programmed to mimic and counter enemy tactics, tried to copy this new approach. But they could not replicate what they could not understand. The Federation was no longer just being unpredictable, they were being creative. And creativity, Lisa realized, was something that could not be programmed or learned through pattern recognition. Creativity required something the Devourers had, never possessed. The ability to imagine possibilities that had never existed before. The tide of battle shifted decisively. Devourer ships that had adapted to every previous tactic found themselves unable to counter strategies that had never been tried before, that emerged from the combined imagination of multiple species working together in ways none of them could achieve alone. One by one, the ancient machine intelligences were destroyed by an enemy they could not comprehend. When the last Devourer ship exploded in a burst of dark energy, the Federation fleet hung motionless in space, hardly able to believe what they had accomplished. The enemy that had consumed civilizations for 3,000 years had been defeated by a force that fought with intuition, emotion, and creativity. "All ships, this is Coordination Command," Lisa said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and relief. "The Altair system is secure. Well done, everyone." The celebration that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Ship crews that had been forced to work together despite their differences discovered that they had become something greater than the sum of their parts. Voltari officers found themselves enjoying the unpredictability of Kronan tactics. Kronan. Warriors appreciated the subtle coordination of Threnari flight patterns. Threnari commanders marveled at the creative problem-solving of human leadership. But Lisa knew the victory at Altair was only the beginning. The rest of the Devourer fleet was still out there, and news of the new tactics would spread quickly through both Federation and enemy forces. Over the following months, the transformation of galactic warfare accelerated. Mixed species crews became the standard rather than the exception. Officers from different worlds learned to coordinate not just their technologies, but their ways of thinking. The rigid doctrines that had defined military strategy for millennia gave way to fluid, adaptive approaches that combined logic and intuition, calculation and creativity. The remaining Devourer fleets, programmed to counter every known form of galactic warfare, found themselves facing an enemy that no longer followed any known patterns. Federation forces fought with strategies that emerged from the fusion of different species' perspectives, creating approaches that were both completely new and impossibly effective. The Federation War Council was unlike anything Lisa had ever seen. Through the quantum communication link, she could see beings from across the galaxy gathered in a massive chamber on the capital world of Xanthari Prime. Voltari admirals with their crystalline thinking processes, Kronan generals whose battle scars told stories of 1,000 victories, Threnari fleet commanders who moved like living poetry, and dozens of other species she did not recognize. They all looked desperate. Admiral Kex Prime, the highest ranking, Voltari in the Federation fleet, spoke first. His voice came through the communicator like the sound of ice breaking. "In the past 18 days, we have lost 47 major vessels, 6 colony worlds, and an estimated 4 billion sentient beings," he said. "Every strategic approach we have attempted has been countered within hours. The Devourers appear to be learning our tactics faster than we can develop new ones." General Mordak of the Kronan Empire slammed a massive fist on the table. "We need to attack them directly, mass our forces, and strike at their main fleet." "We tried that at Rigel," Admiral Kex Prime replied coldly. "The result was the complete destruction of the 3rd Battle Group. The Devourers adapted to our assault formation before we could reach effective weapons range." Lisa watched the arguing through the communication screen and felt a familiar pattern emerging. The Voltari wanted to calculate the perfect strategy. The Kronan wanted to attack with overwhelming force, and the other species each had their own approaches based on their natural thinking patterns. But every approach they tried was logical, predictable, and easily countered. Dr. Kresh stepped forward to address the council. "Honored leaders, I present Lisa Martinez and Jake Morrison, human students at the Galactic Academy. They have developed a theory about why our conventional strategies are failing, and they propose an alternative approach." The reaction was immediate. Several council members made sounds that Lisa recognized as disbelief or annoyance. General Mordak's laugh sounded like rocks grinding together. "You bring us children?" he rumbled. "Humans who have been spacefaring for less than a century? What could they possibly teach beings who have been fighting wars for millennia?" Dr. Kresh's telepathic voice carried calm authority. Perhaps that is precisely why you should listen to them. Sometimes fresh perspectives can see solutions that experience blinds us to. Admiral Kex Prime's large black eyes focused on Lisa through the screen. Very well. Human student Lisa Martinez, explain your theory. Lisa's mouth felt dry, but she forced herself to speak clearly. The Devourers are machine intelligences, which means they learn by analyzing patterns. Every time you attack them, they study your approach and develop counters, but they can only counter what they can predict. Obviously, General Mordak growled. What is your point? My point is that you're all thinking in patterns, Lisa said, feeling her confidence grow. Voltari always choose the most logical approach. Cronin always seek direct confrontation. Threnari always coordinate in formation. Every species has its own way of thinking, but they're all predictable ways. Jake stepped up beside her. But humans think differently. We make decisions based on emotion, intuition, and sometimes pure randomness. We do things that don't make logical sense, and sometimes that works better than logic. A Threnari admiral, whose name sounded like wind chimes, fluttered its wings nervously. You propose that we abandon strategic doctrine in favor of chaos? That is madness. Not chaos, Lisa said. Controlled unpredictability. The ancient records mention a species called the Wanderers who defeated the Devourers before. They were described as chaotic thinkers who fought without logic. We think they used the same kind of thinking that humans use naturally. Admiral Kex Prime was silent for a long moment, processing this information with typical Voltari thoroughness. You suggest that human irrationality could be weaponized against an enemy that learns through pattern recognition? Exactly, Lisa said. But it's not just about being random. It's about combining human thinking with your technology and knowledge, using intuition and emotion to make strategic choices that pure logic would never consider. The council erupted in discussion. Some members seemed intrigued by the possibility, while others clearly thought the humans were wasting precious time with impossible theories. Lisa could see the division forming along species lines, each group falling back on their natural ways of thinking about problems. General Mordak stood up, his massive form dominating the screen. Even if this theory has merit, how do you propose to implement it? Human forces are negligible. You have a handful of primitive ships and no experience with galactic warfare. You don't need human ships, Jake said. You need human thinking. Applied to your ships and crews, mixed species crews commanded using human tactical doctrine. Impossible, the Threnari admiral said. Species coordination requires compatible thought patterns. How can beings work together when their decision-making processes are fundamentally different? Lisa remembered her time at the academy working with alien teammates who thought in completely different ways. I've been learning to bridge different thinking styles, she said, to help Voltari understand intuitive decisions, to show Cronin how individual brilliance can work in group strategies. It's possible, but it requires a different kind of command structure. Dr. Kresh spoke up. I have observed Lisa's progress at the academy. She has demonstrated an unusual ability to coordinate diverse thinking patterns into effective strategies. Her simulation victories have been unprecedented. Admiral Kex Prime tilted his head, a gesture Lisa had learned meant deep consideration, in Voltari body language. You propose that this human student could command Federation forces in actual combat? The suggestion hung in the air like a physical presence. Lisa felt the weight of every eye in the council chamber focused on her through the communication link. The idea was insane. She was a college student who had been studying military strategy for less than a year. These beings had been fighting wars since before humans discovered agriculture. But she thought about her simulation victories, about the way she had learned to combine human intuition with alien capabilities. She thought about the devourers consuming worlds while the galaxy's greatest strategic minds failed to stop them. Not command, Lisa said quietly. Coordinate. I don't know enough about galactic warfare to give detailed orders, but I could help design strategies that combine human unpredictability with your species' strengths. I could help crews learn to think in ways the devourers won't expect. General Mordak laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. You ask us to bet the fate of the galaxy on the tactical judgment of a single human child? You're already betting the fate of the galaxy, Jake pointed out. And you're losing. What do you have to lose by trying something different? The council fell silent. Lisa could see the struggle playing out on alien faces as logical minds tried to process an inherently illogical proposal. Everything about the plan violated their understanding of how warfare should work. Admiral Kex Prime spoke first. The logical analysis suggests that continuing current strategies will result in total defeat within 37 days. Therefore, any alternative approach that offers even a small probability of success should be considered. The Altair system is under immediate threat, added a species Lisa did not recognize, whose voice sounded like singing crystals. If we are going to test unconventional tactics, that engagement would provide an opportunity. Dr. Kresh nodded. The Altair defense fleet is already lost by conventional standards. They would serve as an ideal test case for experimental strategies. Lisa felt her heart pounding. They were actually considering it. The leaders of galactic civilization were actually willing to try her crazy human ideas because their own approaches had failed so completely. I have conditions, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. General Mordak's eyes flashed dangerously. You make demands of the Federation War Council? Not demands, Lisa said quickly. Requirements for the strategy to work. First, I need mixed crews on every ship. No single-species vessels. Second, the crews need to be trained to follow orders even when those orders don't make logical sense to them. Third, I need real-time communication with all fleet commanders during the battle. Acceptable, Admiral Kex Prime said after a moment. What else? Lisa took a deep breath. I need Jake working with me. Human thinking works better when there are multiple perspectives. And I need the crew training to start immediately. We have maybe a week before the Devourers reach Altair. The next few days were a blur of activity unlike anything Lisa had ever experienced. Transport ships arrived at the Academy to take her and Jake to the Altair system. Federation personnel worked around the clock to create mixed-species crews, according to her specifications. Ship captains who had commanded single-species vessels for decades suddenly found themselves working with beings whose thought patterns they barely understood. The resistance was immediate and obvious. Voltari officers complained that Kronan crew members were too aggressive and unpredictable. Kronan warriors struggled to follow orders from Threnari commanders whose decisions seemed weak and indecisive. Threnari coordinators were overwhelmed, trying to manage crews that could not share telepathic communication. The emergency alarm started screaming at 3 in, station time. Lisa jerked awake in her bed as red lights flashed across the ceiling and the walls. Next to her, Zix 4419 was already sitting up, its large black eyes reflecting the warning lights. This is not a drill, the station's computer voice announced in 12 different languages. All students report to emergency assembly areas immediately. This is not a drill. Lisa had never heard the emergency alarms before, and the sound made her stomach clench with fear. She pulled on her clothes and followed Zix 4419 into the hallway, where hundreds of students were moving in organized groups toward the main assembly hall. The hall was chaos. Students from dozens of species filled the space, their voices creating a noise like nothing Lisa had ever heard. Some were making sounds she recognized as panic, while others spoke in the clicking, whistling, and humming languages of their home worlds. The air felt thick with tension and fear. Commander Thek stood on the main platform, along with the other senior instructors. His armor-like skin looked darker than usual under the emergency lights. When he spoke, his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Students of the Galactic Academy," he announced. "We have received word from the Federation High Command. The Devourers have returned." The hall fell silent. Lisa had never heard the name before, but the reaction from every other student told her this was something terrible. Some species made sounds of fear, others seemed to freeze in place, and a few began what looked like prayer rituals. "For those unfamiliar with galactic history," Commander Thek continued, "the Devourers are an ancient machine intelligence that consumed entire star systems 3,000 years ago. They convert all matter, planets, ships, and living beings, into more war machines. They were thought to have been destroyed, but our deep space monitoring stations have detected their signature energy patterns in the outer rim." Dr. Kresh stepped forward, her elderly form moving slowly but with dignity. When she spoke, her voice was transmitted directly into the minds of everyone present through her telepathic abilities. "The Federation's initial response fleets have engaged the enemy," her mental voice said. "The results have been troubling. Standard military doctrine appears ineffective against devourer tactics. They adapt to our strategies faster than we can implement them." Lisa felt Jake's presence beside her before she saw him. He had pushed through the crowd to reach her, his face pale with worry. "How bad is this?" Lisa whispered to him. "Really bad," Jake whispered back. "I've been studying galactic history. The Devourers nearly wiped out all intelligent life in the galaxy before. If they're back," Commander Thek was speaking again, "many of you will be evacuated to your home systems within the next 48 hours. Transport ships are already en route. However, some students may remain if their worlds are too distant or if their families request it." Over the next 2 days, the Academy transformed from a place of learning into a refugee center. Ship after ship arrived to take students home to their families and worlds. The Voltari students departed in sleek silver vessels that moved like liquid metal. The Cronin left in heavily armored warships that looked like flying fortresses. The Threnari took flight in ships that seemed to dance through space rather than simply travel. Lisa watched them go with mixed feelings. Part of her envied them for having homes to return to, families who could protect them. But another part of her felt like she was watching something important being destroyed. The Academy had been a place where different species learned to work together, and now it was breaking apart as everyone retreated to their own kind. Earth was too far away and too primitive to offer any protection. The human government had sent word that Lisa and Jake should stay at the Academy, which was considered one of the safest places in the galaxy. Lisa was not sure if this was because Earth thought the Academy was actually safe, or because they knew Earth would be even less safe. By the end of the week, only about 50 students remained from the original population of nearly 1,000. They came from species whose worlds were already under threat, whose families lived too far away, or who had nowhere else to go. Lisa found herself part of a strange new community of refugees and strays. The news from the war front grew worse each day. The Federation's main battle fleet had engaged the Devourers near the Proxima system and had been completely destroyed. 3 entire worlds had been consumed, their populations converted into raw materials for more Devourer machines. Every conventional strategy the Federation tried was countered within hours. They learned too fast, Commander Thek explained to the remaining students during what had become daily briefings. Our generals plan an attack. The Devourers analyze our approach during the first engagement, and by the second engagement, they have developed perfect counters. It is as if they can see into our minds and predict our every move. Dr. Kresh had been spending most of her time in the Academy's ancient archives, searching through records that went back thousands of years. She looked tired and worried in a way that made even her telepathic presence feel heavy. "There must be something," she said during one briefing. "The Devourers were defeated before. Someone found a way to stop them, but the records from that time are incomplete." "What do we know about how they were stopped?" asked Nay 7834, one of the few remaining Voltari students. Dr. Kresh's mental voice carried frustration and confusion. "Very little. The species that defeated them were called the Wanderers. But all detailed records of their tactics were destroyed, apparently on purpose. The only descriptions that remain call them chaotic thinkers who fought without logic and beings who brought order through disorder." Lisa felt something stir in the back of her mind. Those descriptions sounded familiar, but she could not quite place why. That night, she could not sleep. She kept thinking about the fragments of information Dr. Kresh had shared. Chaotic thinkers who fought without logic, beings who brought order through disorder. Where had she heard those concepts before? She got up and walked to the observation deck, a quiet area where students could look out at the stars. The deck was empty except for Jake, who was sitting by one of the large windows, staring into space. "Can't sleep either?" he asked as she sat down beside him. "I keep thinking about what Dr. Kresh said," Lisa replied, "about the Wanderers and how they fought." "You mean the chaotic thinking thing?" Jake nodded. "I've been thinking about that too. It sounds a lot like humans," Lisa finished. That's what I was thinking, but that's impossible, right? Humans weren't even spacefaring 3,000 years ago." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Maybe," he said. "But what if the Wanderers weren't humans? What if they were just like humans? What if they thought the way we think?" The idea sent a chill down Lisa's spine. "You mean, what if the reason humans are so different from the other galactic species is because we think like the species that saved the galaxy before?" "It would explain a lot," Jake said. "Why human thinking seems so alien to the other species. Why your tactics work even though they shouldn't. Why we make decisions based on feelings and intuition instead of pure logic." Lisa stared out at the stars, trying to wrap her mind around the possibility. "But if that's true, then maybe humans could fight the Devourers the way the Wanderers did," Jake said quietly. The thought was terrifying and exciting at the same time. Lisa remembered her first simulation victory when she had used chaos tactics to defeat an enemy that expected logical moves. She thought about how she had learned to bridge different ways of thinking, to combine human intuition with galactic knowledge. "We need to tell Dr. Kresh about this," Lisa said. They found Dr. Kresh in her office, surrounded by holographic displays showing ancient texts and historical records. She looked up as they entered, her large eyes tired from hours of research. "Lisa, Jake," she said, her mental voice warm despite her exhaustion. "You should be resting." "Dr. Kresh," Lisa said, We think we might know something about the Wanderers. The elderly Zenthree's attention focused completely on them. Tell me. Lisa and Jake explained their theory about how human thinking patterns seem to match the descriptions of Wanderer tactics. They talked about chaos thinking and intuitive decision-making, about bringing order through disorder and fighting without logic. Dr. Kresh listened without interrupting, her telepathic presence growing more intense as they spoke. When they finished, she was silent for a long time. "It is possible," she finally said. "The timeline does not match, but perhaps the Wanderers were not human ancestors, but rather a species that thought in similar patterns. Or perhaps—" She paused, and Lisa could feel uncertainty in her mental voice. "Perhaps the galaxy has seen this pattern before," Dr. Kresh continued. "Perhaps when civilizations become too logical, too predictable, the universe produces beings who think differently. Beings who can see solutions that pure logic cannot find." "So what do we do?" Jake asked. Dr. Kresh stood up and walked to her. "Window, looking out at the stars where somewhere in the darkness, the Devourers were consuming worlds. We need to test this theory," she said. "But testing it will require convincing the Federation High Command to try tactics that violate every principle of modern warfare. It will require them to trust the strategic—" Lisa Martinez pressed her face against the cold window of the transport ship and watched the massive space station grow larger in front of them. Kepler Station was bigger than anything she had ever seen, bigger than the largest cities on Earth, put together. Metal arms stretched out in all directions like a giant metal flower floating in the darkness of space. Lights blinked across its surface like stars, and ships moved around it like tiny insects around a lamp. The other passengers on the transport ship were not human. Lisa was the only one of her kind aboard, and she felt their eyes watching her whenever she moved. The tall blue creature sitting across from her had 3 arms and eyes that never seemed to blink. It had been staring at her for the past hour, its head tilted to one side like it was trying to figure out what she was. Lisa tried to smile at it, but the creature just looked away. Her stomach felt tight with worry. She had been traveling for 3 weeks to get here, jumping from one transport to another, getting further and further from Earth with each stop. The Galactic Academy was supposed to be the best school in the galaxy, a place where the smartest young beings from every world came to learn about war and strategy and leadership, and somehow they had picked her. Lisa still could not believe it was real. 6 months ago, she had been a normal college student studying history at a small university in California. Then the aliens had made contact with Earth, and everything changed. The Galactic Federation had offered to let one human student join. Their academy is part of a new program to help Earth learn about the galaxy. Out of millions of applications, they had chosen her. Lisa Martinez, whose biggest achievement before this was winning her high school debate tournament. The transport ship shook as it moved into the docking bay. Lisa grabbed her bag and followed the other passengers toward the exit. The air felt different when she stepped out, thinner and with a strange metallic taste. The gravity was lighter, too, making her feel like she might float away if she was not careful. The docking bay was huge and filled with beings she had only seen in videos before. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, but others moved on 4 legs, or 6 legs, or seemed to float without legs at all. Their skin was every color she could imagine: blue, green, purple, silver, and some colors that seemed to change as she watched. Strange languages filled the air, sounds like music and static and whistles all mixed together. A tall creature approached her. It looked almost human except for its pale gray skin and the fact that it had no hair anywhere on its head. When it spoke, its voice sounded like a computer. "You are the human exchange student Lisa Martinez," it said. It was not a question. "Yes, that's me," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I am Zix 4419 of the Voltari. I have been assigned as your roommate. You will follow me now." Zix 4419 turned and walked away without waiting for an answer. Lisa hurried to keep up, dragging her bag behind her. They walked through long hallways filled with students of different species. Some were tall and thin, others short and wide. One group had wings. Another had tentacles instead of arms. Lisa tried not to stare, but everything was so different from Earth that she could not help herself. "Your species is smaller than I expected," Zix 4419 said as they walked. "The records indicated humans were among the larger bipedal species, but you appear quite fragile." "I'm actually pretty average for a human," Lisa said. "Maybe even a little tall." "Interesting. This suggests human records about themselves are inaccurate? Or that humans have difficulty with basic measurement concepts." Lisa felt her face get hot. "We measure things just fine, thank you." Zix 4419 stopped walking and looked at her with its large black eyes. "You are experiencing an emotional response to my statement. This is fascinating. Voltari do not waste energy on such reactions when presented with logical observations." "Well, I'm not Voltari," Lisa said. "No, clearly you are not," Zix 4419 agreed, and continued walking. Their room was small but comfortable, with 2 beds and a window that looked out at the stars. One side was already filled with strange devices that hummed and blinked with lights. The other side was empty except for a simple bed and desk. "This is your area," Zix 4419 said, pointing to the empty side. "I have taken the liberty of adjusting the environmental controls to something your species can tolerate. The temperature has been raised and the oxygen content increased. These changes are not optimal for Voltari biology, but we have been instructed to accommodate primitive species requirements." Lisa felt her temper rise again, but she took a deep breath and counted to 5 like her mother had taught her. Getting angry at her roommate on the first day would not help anything. "Thank you," she said instead. "I appreciate that. You are welcome. Classes begin tomorrow at the 7th hour. I will wake you if you are still unconscious at that time. Humans require significantly more sleep than most intelligent species." The next morning, Lisa followed a crowd of students to her first class, Advanced Military Strategy. The classroom was a large, round room with seats arranged in circles around a central area where holographic displays could appear. Lisa found an empty seat near the back and tried to make herself small. The instructor was a Cronin, one of the warrior species she had read about. It stood over 8 feet tall, with thick armor-like skin and arms that looked like they could break a human in half. When it spoke, its voice was deep and rough like grinding stone. "I am Commander Thek," it said, its yellow eyes scanning the room. "For the next term, I will attempt to teach you the basics of military strategy. Some of you may actually learn something useful. Others will waste my time and yours." Its eyes stopped on Lisa, and she felt like prey being studied by a predator. "We have a new addition to our class this term," Commander Thek continued. "A human, from the species that just discovered fire yesterday by galactic standards. Lisa Martinez. Please stand." Lisa's heart pounded as she stood up. Every eye in the room was on her now, and she could feel the weight of their stares. "Humans have been spacefaring for approximately 50 of their years," Commander Thek said. Their largest military conflict involved primitive chemical weapons and metal projectiles. Their understanding of three-dimensional combat is theoretical at best. Miss Martinez, please tell the class why you believe you belong in this room with beings whose species have been perfecting warfare for millennia. Lisa's mouth felt dry. She looked around the room at all the strange faces watching her. Some looked curious, others seemed amused, and a few appeared annoyed that their time was being wasted. "I don't know if I belong here," Lisa said quietly. "But I'm here to learn, and I promise I'll work harder than anyone else in this room." A few students made sounds that might have been laughter from their species. Commander Thek's expression did not change. "Work ethic is admirable," he said, "but this is not a class where effort alone will suffice. Strategy requires intelligence, experience, and an understanding of violence that your species has barely begun to comprehend. We shall see if you can prove me wrong." The class began with a simulation of a space battle. Holographic ships appeared in the center of the room, and students were divided into teams to command fleets against each other. Lisa found herself on a team with 3 other students, a Voltari, a winged species called Threnari, and something that looked like a walking tree. The simulation was unlike anything Lisa had ever experienced. The ships moved in 3 dimensions, weapons fired in patterns she could not follow, and her teammates spoke in technical terms she did not understand. She tried to contribute, but everything happened too fast. Their fleet was destroyed in minutes. "Pathetic," Commander Thek announced. "Team 4 showed no coordination, no understanding of basic tactical principles, and no adaptation to enemy movements. Miss Martinez, your contribution to your team's failure was particularly notable." Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. The other students were already moving on to the next exercise, but she sat there feeling stupid and out of place. After class, she walked slowly back to her room. Other students passed her in the halls, talking in their strange languages about things she did not understand. She had been at the academy for less than 24 hours, and already she felt like giving up. Maybe Commander Thek was right. Maybe humans did not belong here among species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Maybe she was just a primitive creature trying to play with beings far beyond her level. But as she reached her room, Lisa remembered something her father had told her before she left Earth. "Sometimes the best thing about being underestimated," he had said, "is that nobody sees you coming." She was just a human exchange pupil, and everyone expected her to fail. Maybe that would turn out to be her advantage. 3 months had passed since Lisa arrived at Kepler Station, and she was starting to understand how things worked at the Galactic Academy. Every morning, she woke up before 6:44 and spent an extra hour studying the previous day's lessons. Every evening, she stayed in the library until it closed, reading about the different species and their ways of thinking. The work was hard, harder than anything she had ever done on Earth. The other students seemed to understand concepts instantly. That took her hours to figure out. They could calculate 3-dimensional movement in their heads while she needed to draw diagrams on paper. When they discussed famous battles from galactic history, they spoke about events that happened thousands of years ago like they had been there. But Lisa was learning. Slowly, piece by piece, she was starting to see patterns that the other students missed. In tactical simulations, the Voltari students always chose the most logical approach. They would calculate the optimal strategy based on available data and execute it perfectly. But they struggled when something unexpected happened. If an enemy ship appeared where it should not be, or if equipment failed in an unusual way, The Voltari would pause while they recalculated everything. The Cronin students were different. They fought like individual warriors even when commanding fleets. They were brilliant at direct combat and understood weapons and armor better than anyone, but they had trouble with complex group strategies that required multiple fleets to work together. Each Cronin commander wanted to be the one to strike the killing blow. The Threnari could coordinate beautifully with each other, moving their forces like flocks of birds in perfect formation, but they thought so much alike that they rarely surprised their enemies. The Zenthri were even more connected, sharing thoughts between their minds, but that meant they sometimes got stuck thinking the same thoughts over and over. Lisa started keeping notes about how each species approached problems. She drew charts showing their strengths and weaknesses. At first it was just curiosity, but gradually she began to see how she might use this knowledge. The breakthrough came during a simulation of the Battle of Helix Nebula, a famous victory from galactic history where a small Federation fleet had defeated a much larger enemy force. Lisa's team was assigned to play the role of the Federation fleet, while a team of advanced students commanded the enemy. Her teammates, 2 Voltari, a Cronin, and a Threnari, immediately began planning their strategy using the historical approach. They would use the nebula's gas clouds for cover, strike at the enemy's supply lines, and force them to spread their forces too thin. "This is the optimal approach," announced Keck 7721, one of the Voltari. "Historical records show this strategy succeeded with minimal casualties." "The enemy will expect this," Lisa said. "They've studied the same battle we have. They know exactly what we're going to do." "The strategy succeeded before," the Cronin student, Gorth, rumbled. "It will succeed again. There is no reason to change proven tactics." "But what if we did something completely different?" Lisa asked. "What if instead of using the nebula for cover, we used it to hide a trap?" The Threnari student, whose name sounded like wind chimes when spoken, fluttered its wings nervously. "That is not how the battle was won. We must follow established doctrine." Lisa tried to explain her idea, but her teammates were not interested. They had already decided on their approach, and they saw no reason to listen to the human who barely understood basic fleet movements. The simulation began, and everything went exactly as Lisa had predicted. The enemy team knew the historical strategy and had prepared counters for it. Lisa's team was destroyed in less than an hour. "Predictable," Commander Theck announced to the class. Team 7 followed standard doctrine without considering that their enemies might also know standard doctrine. A competent commander adapts to circumstances rather than blindly following historical examples. After class, Lisa stayed behind and approached Commander Theck. The massive Cronin was reviewing data from the simulation on his holographic display. "Commander," Lisa said, her voice barely steady, "could I try running that simulation again? By myself?" Commander Theck looked down at her with his yellow eyes. "You wish to command an entire fleet alone? You barely understand how to coordinate 2 ships." "I have an idea about how it could work differently," Lisa said. "I know I'm not as smart as the other students, but maybe I can see something they missed." Commander Theck was quiet for a long moment. Then he activated the simulation controls. "Very well," he said. "Show me what the primitive human mind can accomplish." Lisa took command of the Federation fleet in the simulation. Instead of using the nebula for cover, she positioned her ships to make it look like she was following the standard strategy. But when the enemy fleet moved to counter her expected approach, she did something no one anticipated. She scattered her forces in what looked like complete chaos. Ships moved in random directions with no apparent coordination. To any observer, it would look like her fleet was falling apart under pressure. The enemy commanders, confident in their superior strategy, moved in for an easy victory. But Lisa's chaos was not random at all. Each ship was moving to a specific position, and when they reached those positions, her scattered fleet suddenly became a perfectly coordinated trap. The enemy fleet found itself surrounded, with Federation, ships attacking from directions that should have been impossible. The enemy had planned for logical moves and strategic positioning, but they had no counter for apparent madness that turned into perfect coordination. Lisa's fleet won decisively. Commander Thek stared at the simulation results for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Interesting," he said. "Your approach violated every principle of sound tactics, yet it achieved victory. How did you conceive this strategy?" "I watched how everyone thinks," Lisa said. "The other students are really smart, but they all think in patterns. The Voltari calculate the best logical move, the Kronen look for the strongest attack, the Threnari coordinate like a flock. But humans, we don't always think logically. Sometimes we do things that don't make sense, and sometimes that works." "Chaos tactics," Commander Thek mused. "There are historical references to such approaches, but they are considered unreliable by modern strategic doctrine." "Maybe that's why they work," Lisa said, "because nobody expects them anymore." Word of Lisa's simulation victory spread quickly. Through the academy, students who had barely noticed her before started paying attention. Some seemed curious about her unusual approach, while others were skeptical that luck could be mistaken for skill. It was during this time that Lisa met Jake Morrison, another human student who had arrived at the academy the year before. Jake was studying xenobiology rather than military strategy, but he had been watching Lisa's progress with interest. "You're making waves," Jake told her as they sat in the academy's cafeteria, eating food that barely resembled anything from Earth. "Half the students think you're crazy, and the other half think you might be on to something." "What do you think?" Lisa asked. Jake smiled. "I think you're figuring out what I've been studying for a year. Every species here is incredibly advanced, but they're also limited by how they think. The Voltari are logical to a fault. The Kronen are individualistic warriors. The Zenthri share thoughts so much they sometimes lose individual creativity. But humans? We're unpredictable. We think with emotion and intuition as much as logic." "The professors think that makes us primitive," Lisa said. "The professors think in the same patterns as their species," Jake replied. "But I've been studying how different species solve problems, and I'm starting to think our primitive thinking might actually be an advantage. We don't just calculate the best move, we imagine moves that others never consider." Over the following weeks, Lisa's performance in simulations improved dramatically. She started combining human intuition with the technical knowledge she was learning about galactic warfare. Instead of trying to think like the alien students, she learned to think like a human in an alien context. She began to understand that the key was not just being unpredictable, but being unpredictable in useful ways. Random chaos was just chaos, but directed unpredictability could confuse enemies while achieving real objectives. Her classmates started asking her for advice, something that would have seemed impossible when she first arrived. The Voltari students wanted to understand how she could make decisions without complete data. The Kronen students were curious about her group coordination tactics. Even the Threnari asked about her unusual approach to fleet positioning. Lisa found herself becoming a bridge between different ways of thinking. She could help a Voltari student understand why sometimes the illogical choice was the right choice. She could show a Cronin how individual brilliance could work within team strategies. She could demonstrate to the Threnari how breaking formation could sometimes be more effective than perfect coordination. Dr. Yenna Kresh, the elderly Zenthri professor who taught strategic theory, began calling on Lisa more often in class. Unlike Commander Thek, who challenged students through intimidation, Dr. Kresh encouraged exploration of new ideas. "Miss Martinez," Dr. Kresh said during one lecture, "you have proposed